Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Thank you, All Tech is Human, for having us here tonight. And we will do our absolute best to be brief and succinct, since we know we are all that stands between you and more drinks and more networking and mingling. So we'll go through introduction super fast. As Matt said, I'm Andrew Zack, policy manager at the Family Online Safety Institute, FOSI. Thank you to TikTok for giving us a shout out earlier, nonprofit based here in DC. Before that, I was with Senator Markey's office on Capitol Hill.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chanel Cornett. I am a senior counsel on the trust and safety and privacy teams at Zoom. And prior to Zoom, I worked for a small think tank focused on criminal justice policy work.
I'm Dave Byrne. I am the founder of TrustRaise. I am supporting startups as they try to establish themselves in the market, whether it be getting through VC funding or helping them with their initial business strategy. Before that, I was at Spotify, TikTok, and Google.
And I'm Vaishnavi. I founded VYS, which is a policy consultancy focused on youth safety, privacy, and well-being. I work with companies on helping them build just that. And I used to be at Meta, Twitter, Google, and Disney. So nice to see you all.
So some great experience up here with me. Thank you. So we'll dive right in. Since we're in DC, we're just jumping into policy. There are so many online safety legislation and regulatory ideas that we could spend all 30 minutes just naming them. But instead, let's start on a positive note. So are there specific pieces of legislation or regulation that has really good trust and safety policy ideas, things that you think could make a difference or already have made a difference?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get up here and endorse any specific set of policy, but I will just say that in general, I am very excited about the momentum that's occurring in our field. I'm very excited about all the engagement that we're seeing amongst different communities that are involved in this space. And so, social media is here to stay, and kids and children and their kids and children will likely be using these platforms in the future. So I think that the more that we continue to engage and collaborate and share ideas and learn from each other, I think that we'll actually be able to see the ball move forward. And, that includes not just industry working in silos, but that includes the kids and teens themselves, their parents, their educators. So when I think of policy ideas that I support, they're along the lines of that theme of trust and safety industry not working in a silo. So I'm a huge supporter of third-party risk assessments. We've seen that across the globe with the DSA. There's a requirement there with the online safety bill. And so, in the past, platforms were possibly conducting these risk assessments or even research into the risks that their platforms had on kids. But these were done in-house, right? And so what that meant was they were able to either hide the results or ignore the results or skew them and interpret them for their own purposes. And so now with third-party risk assessments, these will be conducted externally. And I think that it's an added lever of accountability for platforms, and they won't be able to just hide. And, governments will have oversight and enforcement powers over these as well. And also to make sure that there are mitigation measures in place to meet these risks and to actually get them addressed. So excited about that. And then also I think any requirements that place a mandate on companies to create tools which enable community involvement as well. So reporting mechanisms, I think it's important that we're able to learn from our users and we're able to actually be able to see what's going on online. I think it's virtually impossible for us to be aware of every single instance of harm that occurs online. So having that engagement, I think, is really necessary to get the ball rolling forward. I'm a supporter of trusted flaggers. We've seen that in the Digital Service Act as well. And so, there are communities and organizations that have distinct expertise in a certain issue area that maybe we're not able in the industry able to anticipate. So those are my two things. I think just in general, any sort of increased accountability, any sort of increased transparency, I think those will do us well.
Well, you mentioned DSA, and when I think of where there's actually good legislation, where there's good momentum, I'm going to say that a lot of it is right now coming out of Europe. A lot of it is coming out of the European Commission with DSA. It's coming out of the UK with their framework around AI regulation. It's coming out of Ireland with the Child Online Safety Act there. So I think there's good things that are happening, but I think when we look here in the US, there's still a lot that can be learned from what's happening there. They are really focused around, yes, transparency and accountability, which are essential, but also making sure that there's robust frameworks that that truly accountability can happen. That it's not just, hey, we're going to just end up arbitrating in court for years with different people that we think are going to be going against what these laws are. There's going to be forums for actually discussion of like, how do we not only look at what we have today, but how do we continue building on this collaboratively and as an industry? Like I mentioned the UK with their AI regulation framework, like one thing that they came out with was very much stating that this is not a done thing. This is not the end. This is only the beginning and only the start of more regulations, more frameworks, more participation, more things that are going to happen. You know, we heard in the first panel, it's like regulation is coming, but I think right now where I look to for the thought leadership in regulation is out of Europe.
I have one very clear favorite policy development, a regulatory development of the last few years, and it is age-appropriate design. It's such a glorious mouthful of a phrase, and yet suddenly we all know it, we all talk about it, it's mushroomed into legislation across a number of countries. It's a thing in California. And I think I am excited about it because it speaks to a concept that I think is pretty self-evident, that young people should have developmentally appropriate experiences online. I think most of us inherently have always believed that. We know that, you know, what a 13-year-old experiences online should probably be moderated in some way that's different from what a 30-year-old experiences online. But I think historically, we outsourced a lot of that work to parents, to educators, to social institutions, law enforcement. We didn't give them too many resources to really do it. I mean, we have great literacy and citizenship programs and guides to, you know, to help parents have these conversations. But I think with age-appropriate design, we're finally seeing a recognition that if you are building for young people, if you are marketing to them, if you are profiting from them, surely you must design responsibly for them. Surely there's some responsibility on your end as well. And so that's one of my favorite developments. I think, of course, the children's code in the UK that used to be the age-appropriate design code has been just, has moved the needle in a ton of ways, which we can get into later.
Thank you. I mean, that was a great opening gambit of positivity. Now maybe some constructive criticism. Turning it around, are there online safety policy ideas that you think could be potentially harmful or dangerous or like severe unintended consequences that we need to fix or pay more attention to? Open to everyone.
Well, to think about like child safety right now, the thing that I'm most concerned about at the moment is there's a lot of well-meaning child safety acts right now and kid safety online acts where they are trying to make sure that kids don't get exposed to harmful content, but the definition of harmful content is so important to get right. There are so many kids who rely on mental health resources, that rely on LGBTQ plus communities, that rely on so many things that they don't get in their home or in their school. And what worries me is that when you think of states that are potentially restricting these rights, their version of what is harmful to young people is very different than what is actually harmful to young people. So I think that is vitally important to get right.
Yeah, he took my point. I was gonna say that.
Sorry. Sorry.
But I got another one. I just think in general, like any regulation that we write, it should respect our human rights. So what I mean by that is I'm thinking of the right to privacy. I'm a huge privacy proponent. So any regulation where the right to privacy is significantly sacrificed because of safety reasons, like I just think we should avoid, and we should realize that like we're not writing these regulations in a silos. They have implications on other rights as well. So I think of like identity verification requirements or H checks, when there aren't additional privacy protections in place. Or I think about like government backdoors where the government can just have unlimited access to our private data and our content and our conversations. I think we should steer super, super clear of that. And then also, I work for a tech company, so I will just say that like there's a lot of momentum in this area, and that regulatory development shouldn't be used as a means to just exert general control over the tech industry, because the tech industry is also the way by which we are able to connect, we're able to learn, and we're able to share with each other. And so if we can stay focused on what the goals are and not the general overarching like abilities that we'd be able to accomplish with the regulation, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think they've done such a good job of explaining all this. I think about this from the youth perspective a lot, and when we talk about children's rights, we forget that there's a wide range of rights. It's not just the right to safety or the right to a private experience. There's also the right to access information. There's the right to to be able to come online, and there's, as we speak, a bill sitting on the Florida governor's desk that hopefully he will veto that would ban under 16s from using social media altogether. And that, I think doing that also, frankly, absolves us as a community of building for young people. It absolves like companies, governments, parents, educators of the jobs that we all need to be doing to make sure that young people can actually access the internet in a safe way. And it's just this really blunt tool that says, well, let's just not let them use it altogether. And so I think thinking about the whole range of children's rights is incredibly important when crafting regulation.
And I think, just to add on a little bit, we, in our advocacy work and our policy work, we absolutely have been telling a lot of US lawmakers, hey, go learn from Europe, go learn from the UK. Doesn't always go over well. But they have had years of research and guidance, and what Dave said about the iterative process of, hey, like we ultimately want industry to comply. When industry complies, it creates safer online experiences for young people. So they work with industry, and that is something that the US regulatory agencies have not always done as much versus sue first, ask questions later. So we're all working for the same goal. Moving to that industry side, how have you seen companies improve their trust and safety work internally, whether from direct regulation and maybe some best practices, and where might there still be room for improvement from the company side in their trust and safety work?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is really interesting to me, because I agree with you that Europe has been a driving force in a lot of this. But sometimes it's not even about passing regulation. It's about the specter of regulation or the possibility that you might be regulated. And that itself drives a number of changes. So I would argue that in the last 4 years, we've seen far more protections for youth than we did in the 15 years before. And that's primarily, in my opinion, been driven by increasing amount of regulation. And so just as a couple of examples, the Children's Code, which used to be the Age-Appropriate Design Code, as it was being formed and as the regulators were consulting and seeking feedback from the industry, Coincidentally, companies started implementing very strong privacy settings for young people. That was an interesting coincidence. We've seen we've seen a change in how content is recommended. For example, in the U.S., when the child safety hearings were taking place in January, in the months leading up to that, suddenly a number of companies had a number of updates to share around child safety, including YouTube had released an incredible new policy where they no longer repeatedly will recommend content about fitness or physical comparison of physical features. Meta announced that they would no longer recommend self-harm or eating disorder content, even if it's from an account that you follow. Snapchat suddenly had new features around giving parents more insights. And it's really hard not to see the connection between the prospect of regulation or regulation itself and these changes that companies make. And I think that that speaks also to the fact that, look, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that all regulation is good. We have seen plenty of bad regulation, plenty of ill-informed regulation. We just talked about an example. But I think it does speak to the need for companies to get ahead of some of these issues and really respond to them before the government comes in and does it for them.
Yeah. So in addition to that, like I just think about the landscape. So I'm 29. I was one of the first like users of Facebook and MySpace, you know, and like some of the fears of like our parents back then was just simply like don't get kidnapped. Like there may be like a rando on AOL chat, so you know, steer clear. And like even if that occurred, like I think the only thing I could think of was to either like log off or like delete my account and in like serious matters like call the police. But that's different now. You know, platforms have evolved tremendously, and like I think that kids and their parents have become more aware of all of the potential harms that could occur online, and also like how to protect themselves as well. You know, we're seeing increased user education, as she said. You know, on behalf of the platforms, we're seeing more robust content and behavior policies, which are clearly defined and clearly like set the level of what's expected on the platform. We're seeing, you know, robust tools, back-end and front-end tools being developed for users, which you said as well. But one of the biggest changes that I'm seeing internally is that I might get some pushback for this, but trust and safety is no longer just like a call center or like a customer support function. It's becoming more of a legal and compliance function, where it's sitting under, you know, a legal and compliance organization in the company. And so what that means is we're seeing more specialized analysts that have distinct expertise in a certain subject matter. We're seeing globally dispersed teams where, you know, they understand different cultures and they're able to speak fluently in different languages. We're seeing, you know, our product managers and engineers specializing in trust and safety, and they're sitting closely with general product engineering, and they're able to translate those requirements to them. And then also we have a suite of lawyers now that specialize in trust and safety. And they're able to interpret all of these various compliance requirements that we deal with globally. So I think it's becoming way more specialized and way more legal and way more just robust than it has been in the past.
I think one thing that I've noticed coming from like a lot of tech companies, when I first started working in tech, to your point, trust and safety was not very close to the CEO. Increasingly, we're starting to see tech companies reorg where the CEO is more in tune with what's happening in the trust and safety space, which is great. I think that's really positive. Like we talked about like this, the Senate hearings recently, CEOs are in direct contact with their trust and safety leads to understand what's happening at their company and really get into details there. So that's great. I think transparency and accountability that you brought up earlier, DSA, how many tech companies have published updates of not only, hey, we're DSA compliant, but here's the progress that we're making on DSA. And that's actually something that myself and Matt were talking about earlier. It's like a big part of this is actually about putting the trust back in trust and safety, where the trust actually comes from the people that are connecting with the platforms, with the apps. And a big part of trust is being transparent with like, hey, here's where we're building, here's where we still need to get to. You know, if you don't say anything, people assume that you're doing nothing. So actually providing that transparency is hugely valuable to building up trust. And I think the last thing is something that I've been like advocating for massively is like, I think trust and safety was very often seen by a lot of companies as purely a cost center. I am going to invest in this, but it's going to restrict the content that I can monetize. It's going to restrict like certain things. It's going to make sure that like, hey, they're going to remove a bunch of accounts and that means I can't monetize that. They're going to take down content. They're removing. And it was a very negative sentiment towards the trust and safety teams where often when a company was trying to grow quickly, trust and safety was seen as like can we just say that, have that team there, but like keep them as quiet, as siloed as possible? And I think what's increasingly happening is that actually trust and safety can be an investment channel. If you're thinking about the lifetime value of your users, if you are thinking about advertisers who want to make sure that they don't appear on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal because they are advertising where they shouldn't be, trust and safety are the people that are going to make that happen. If you were to create an app today and it's a terrible user experience and it's going to be full of hate speech and misinformation, see how much it grows without a trust and safety team to clear it up. And I think there's a couple of case studies in the market right now that are kind of showing that, not mentioning any names, but you know.
Thank you. I cannot believe how fast our time is flying, so we are going to quickly move on to the hottest tech trend of last year, Gen AI, with just our 5 remaining minutes. Chanel has already said that social media is here to stay. So what lessons can we maybe take from the last 20 years of social media to better craft safer Gen AI experiences? How do you see the development and proliferation of Gen AI impacting trust and safety?
I think that there are a lot of lessons that we can pull from the last 20 years of social media to apply that are very relevant to Gen AI. I was at a Knight First Amendment Institute event last week and chatting to some great researchers around AI, Gen AI, and the impact on public discourse. And these researchers were presenting these challenges that they were facing with Gen AI, and they were just looking so puzzled and like, how could we possibly address this? And I remember having this moment thinking, that sounds oddly familiar. Like we've dealt with that before. One example that they brought up is that red teams today that are, when you're red teaming a large language model or a large model, and you're trying to identify biases or vulnerabilities, a lot of times you don't have enough data from the companies. And so what ends up happening is that you replicate that model. You're trying to rebuild that model so that you can find biases and vulnerabilities. That's an issue of transparency, and that's an issue that we have faced with social media companies. What's different today is that the regulatory muscle is much stronger. So to give you an example, YouTube published its first community enforcement report back in 2018, and that was like a solid 12 years after Google had acquired them. That was the first community standards report. That's all of 6 years ago? There isn't going to be that kind of grace period in Gen AI today. You're going to see transparency become a really strong drumbeat. We already see that. You're going to see, people wanting to understand what goes into your models. How do you identify vulnerabilities? Will you open up access to researchers? The second thing, and this is really from the youth perspective, is when products or policies are not explainable or understandable by the general population or the government, sometimes well-intentioned but bad regulation follows, and it's accompanied by a lack of public trust. And so I think we've also definitely seen that in social media. For the longest time, community standards and guidelines were not very understandable. They were a little opaque. We didn't provide a ton of details as companies on what exactly, the standards were for keeping a post up or taking it down. And that led to an enormous number of investigations, inquiries, lawsuits, lack of public trust, accusations of bias and censorship. And I think we're going to see the same thing. With generative AI. And then specifically for youth, I think that I've spoken with and looked into a lot of existing products and companies out there. I think we do not have a handle yet on how we're going to address youth, particularly how young people engage with language models. What kind of questions do they ask? What kind of data do you collect about what they're asking? What do you do with that information when someone is a child versus when they are an adult? What kind of answers do you give them? How do you moderate your answers? Are your answers rated differently according to children versus adults? There's a lot more to do in that space.
Yeah, and going back to the point of what regulation about what is harmful content, it's like, what is harmful in those answers? Because if a child is going on looking for advice or support, like, what are they going to get out of that? And like, is that going to be specific to their mental development? I think the other thing as well, going back to like where we're at, there's already regulation being discussed on AI. Like, things are moving way, way quicker than they ever had with anything else. And regulation's coming in this space. We need to raise the bar now and put in those guardrails now. I think the final thing that I'd say here as well is that I think that there is something to be said as well, that when it comes to generative AI, a lot of kids actually know way more than their parents. And it's great that we have these discussions about like how we're supporting kids and generative AI, but I think there also needs to be education for parents as well on how to navigate these areas. Like, just to give you an example, like my nieces, they will see a generative AI image and they'll go, that's fake. My brother will go, wow, look at that. Like, isn't that crazy? And it's like, that kind of education to make sure that like, that parents and kids can have a conversation as well. And I know that came up in the last panel, but it's so vital to make sure that that education is not just there for kids, but also there for parents.
Yeah, and just quickly, in addition to what they've said, I think there are also some important lessons that we can learn about the use of AI in our work as well, to prevent and respond to online harms. I think that the biggest one is just, in general, like, AI is not a replacement for humans. It's not sophisticated enough to understand evolving context. It's not, it will never be good enough as a human. I think it's a great tool that allows us to scale and that allows us to work more fast and more effectively. But I do not think that it should be used as a tool to replace humans in the prevention of bad content and awful things that occur online.
Thank you. So I think we'll just do our absolute final concluding comments. The bar was set very high when they introduced us, saying this panel will solve the problems. So if I can read my own handwriting, I think we discussed a couple takeaways here. Social media isn't going anywhere. We need to learn from it and therefore improve AI safety and regulation. US, learn from Europe. Everyone has a role to play. That's regulation and policymakers, companies and innovative tech, users and families themselves, and the education aspect. Companies, please invest in trust and safety and prioritize it. It is very important. And that everyone everyone here tonight is part of the solution. What did I miss?
Go ahead.
There's no one solution. Like, I think we get so focused on like having like just one answer, but like there's just so many things that we can throw at this problem. And there's like so many ideas that would be effective, but we gotta get out of this idea that there's gonna be one set of regulation or one set of idea that will be able to solve all of the awful harms that occur online. And also, like, the harms of today are going to evolve and become new harms of tomorrow. So we're always going to be trying to solve these issues, and there's no one size fit all approach to this.
To add on something in the recap, regulation is coming. So I know it may be a dirty word, but self-regulation right now, starting today, can make sure that you are set on a path, like everybody in this room is set on a path when the regulation comes out, you don't care. It's just done. You've already raised the bar, you've already done the things. Self-regulation still plays a role here. The other thing that I would also say is that I've met so many people in the trust and safety space where, yes, we're all here working together, but one thing is that so many people that I've met that work in the trust and safety space have these massive aspirations to really have such a big impact. And sometimes we focus on the big things rather than just taking step one. And don't let perfection come at the cost of progress. Like here, we're all here today. This is great. I think thank you for Alltech for bringing us together. But let's make sure that this is an ongoing dialogue. Let's meet again. Apparently they've budget for drinks, so let's keep drinking. Let's keep talking. But let's continue and take steps.
I think yes to continuing to drink and talk. I would say the only two things that we talked about that will stand out to me are we need more transparency, we need more information on how products are working, how policies are being crafted, and we need to think about the full range of young people's rights, and we shouldn't be, we should be really cautious about what we are trading off for the other, because young people deserve all the rights, not just one right.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the panel.